Okay, nikaambia watu education is evil. Okay? Wakasema chukueni Mackenzie mweke gerezani. Nikachukuliwa kweli, nikawekwa gerezani. Nikasavu ile gereza ile siku nilisavu. Nikatoka. But today I remind all people in the world, have they seen that prophecy that education is evil? Leo watoto wao wanafundishwa ushoga na usagaji, lesbianism and inaitwaje? Gayism kwa mashule. CBC ni nini? Comprehensive Sex Education. Hiyo ni nini? Hiyo ni utakatifu.
Meet Paul Mackenzie, the notorious Kenyan cult leader at the center of a horrifying tragedy. Mackenzie has been arrested in connection with the deaths of over 200 individuals, a catastrophe that has sent shockwaves around the globe. He stands accused of wreaking havoc in his community, facing severe charges of murder and terrorism. The allegations are chilling. Mackenzie is said to have incited his followers to starve themselves to death in a macabre attempt to meet Jesus. This devastating case has left the world in shock, with many grappling to understand the depths of its horror. Mackenzie was apprehended in April 2023 after 429 bodies were found in the Shakahola forest near his home. Autopsies revealed that majority of the victims had died from hunger. Some, including children, showed signs of strangulation, beating, or suffocation. As the world grapples with the horror of his deeds, questions arise about the power dynamics and the vulnerability of those ensnared by his influence. Habari Marafiki, and welcome to the African Crime Files. Today is an especially tough one for me, as it highlights the impact cult leaders have in destabilizing communities and dismantling family units by taking advantage and abusing their trust. This is the story of Paul Mackenzie, a street vendor turned pastor who convinced his congregation to starve themselves whilst he profited from selling their organs. Our story today takes place in Kilifi County, situated along the Kenyan coast. Here, amidst the golden sands and shores of Bofa and Diani beaches, visitors encounter a serene haven of coastal charm, surrounded by swaying palm trees and rugged cliffs. And just beyond the shorelines, Kilifi reveals a world of hidden treasures and vibrant communities. Its coastal towns, such as Malindi, showcases centuries-old Swahili architecture and bustling markets offering exotic spices and fresh produce. But Kilifi's beauty extends beyond its landscapes. It is a place of warmth and hospitality, where locals welcome visitors with open arms. Conversations with fishermen at Marani Creek and encounters with artisans in Kilifi town offer glimpses into the region's rich culture, and part of the charm is indulging in the flavors of its seafood, a true taste of coastal Kenya. Kilifi County, in my opinion, is magic that not enough of the world knows about. And it is here that Paul unleashed his worst. Hiding beneath religious robes was a tyrant with an absolute disregard for human life. In his early years, Paul Mackenzie remained inconspicuous, a silent observer amongst his 10 siblings. He rarely drew attention to himself, a very basic, ordinary person, both in his school days and throughout his youth. Paul remained unassuming. His brother described him as an obedient, kind, and reasonably generous individual, despite having limited resources. He was, quite plainly, just Paul. However, the quiet trajectory of Paul's life took a massive turn with his involvement in the Shakahola forest in Kilifi. This quiet village suddenly found itself under the global spotlight due to the cult leader's actions. To his friends and family, Mackenzie is the misunderstood victim in the unfolding tragedy, a preacher persecuted for spreading the word. But to his victims, he is now the most unpopular man in the world, one who exploited them, brainwashed even the learned into burning their documents and instructing them to starve themselves to death. This man is horrible, a real manipulative and deceptive piece of work who hid behind religion, exploiting people's vulnerability, promising a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose and salvation. He isolated these people, controlled the information they received, and created a dependent environment to exert his influence. I want to believe that his family's denial might be rooted in genuine shock and disbelief, as the charismatic personality he projected may have concealed his darker intentions, but we can't deny his victims' experiences and the loss of their lives. In essence, the dual perspectives come from the web of deception Paul created, leaving both victims and family grappling with the unsettling revelation of a person who was, in many ways, not who they seemed to be. Born in 1973 in Lunga Lunga, Paul Mackenzie was the fifth-born child to Mackenzie Kiseni and Anastasia Mwele. According to Robert Mbatha, Mackenzie's younger brother, Paul was a reserved and obedient kid. After finishing high school, he moved to Mombasa in the Kenya coast, living with his eldest brother, Ramisi, and started working as a street vendor. They were a family of 10 and very close and would often check up on each other. However, in 2009, their father passed away, leading them into a hustle-driven life to make ends meet. He struggled to secure a steady job due to a lack of specialized skills, so he turned to pushing a cart and selling flour for several years. After a year or so, one of his sisters, Kadogo, purchased a car for Mackenzie when he relocated to Malindi, also on the Kenyan coast. This marked the beginning of his venture into the taxi business, primarily operating around the Palm Gardens area, a renowned spot for tourists. These travelers, often from Western countries, were often inclined to be generous with tips, driven by the favorable exchange rates that allowed their Western currency to stretch further in Kenya. Paul and his family shared a deep love and support for each other. It's difficult to understand how someone so kind within their family circle could later become the source of immense horror in their community. Perhaps Paul kept the most compassionate aspects of himself for his family, viewing others as mere tools to achieve his goals. This mindset of us versus them may have clouded his judgment and led to the tragic events at Shakahola. By 1999, he had officially established himself in Malindi. During his time in the coastal town, Paul immersed himself in weekend church sermons, balancing his spiritual pursuits with the demands of his weekday taxi business. At a certain point, he announced to his family that he had received a divine calling to become a preacher. Taking on the role, he started as a pastor in Malindi. The year 2003 marked the onset of his preaching career, receiving invitations to conduct sermons at the Malindi Fellowship Baptist. This was the beginning of his ascent as a famous preacher, later establishing his church, Good News International. And this was the inception of Paul's transformation, an evolution that would ultimately lead him down the unsettling path of cult leader. During the same year, Mackenzie met his future wife, fondly referred to as Mama Dan, a term of respect and endearment in Kenya, highlighting the importance of motherhood and family. And so Mama Dan and Paul got married and had 2 children, a boy and a girl. But their love was short-lived, as his wife died in 2009 of what Paul claimed to be asthma. An autopsy was never carried out, as the pastor was a trusted member of society, despite his wife dying so young. The death of his first wife hit him hard, said Mr. Mbatha, his brother. In 2012, Mackenzie remarried a woman named Joyce. The couple gave birth to 4 children, 1 boy and 3 girls. But in 2017, Joyce died at the age of 37. That's now 2 wives dead under suspicious circumstances. Prior to his second wife's death, Paul was arrested following accusations of radicalization. He was accused of brainwashing followers and instructing them to take their children out of school. He was held at Malindi Police Station together with Joyce, and upon their release, her health suddenly deteriorated, and 3 weeks later, she died. Now, I don't know about you, but there were so many red flags that you could sew them all together to make a sail and sail away. This man had 2 wives, both young and mostly in good health. Yet, they both died at home due to supposed health concerns that no one could determine. No autopsies were done, and no witnesses came forward to claim foul play. However, rumor has it that both wives knew too much, and Paul didn't trust them enough not to expose him. He bought the land where he built his church and home. The brother says he was and still is a follower of Mackenzie's church and defended his teachings. I attended all his sermons, his brother stated. My brother taught what he felt was his mission. He used to tell us his sermons are what he was sent by the Holy Spirit to teach, and it was one's choice to believe him or not. Mackenzie preached against healthcare and education, yet his brother emphasizes he still took his children to school, and his wife gave birth to all 5 of them in a hospital, despite what his brother preached. He never forced anyone to follow through with his teachings, said his brother. According to Paul's brother, he only adopted messages that he felt were important to his life and his family. In 2019, Paul married his 3rd wife, Rhoda. Months after their wedding, he told his brothers he was moving out of Malindi to another place where his dream was to start farming. He never mentioned where it was, and they only found out it was Shakahola village when he was arrested and released on a 10,000 Kenya shilling bond. It gets a little confusing here, because the brothers claimed not to know where he was, yet his brother, Mr. Mbatha, states he was one of his followers. That is 4 years of absence, and considering how close they seem to be, I suspect that they knew where he was, or at the very least saw him a few times during this time, and knew he was still in ministry. When asked about that, Mr. Mbatha claimed his brother closed down his church in 2019 and sold everything off to televangelist Ezekiel Odero of New Life Prayer Center and Church. He claims he alone is responsible for the horrors that impacted hundreds at the Shakahola forest. Although Ezekiel was initially arrested, he has been freed after the prosecution noted investigations had been cleared, as Ezekiel had committed no crimes and was only responsible for purchasing assets from Mackenzie. The good news: International Ministries was founded in 2003. Yet, over its 20 years of existence, it delivered everything except good news. When the church began to do well, Mackenzie moved to Malindi and was able to amass a large following, largely via convincing his congregation that he could personally communicate with God. In 2016, unverified reports suggested that a member of the group sold their property on Lamu Island to Mackenzie for 20 million Kenya shillings, which is around 210,000 Australian dollars, and subsequently handed over the entire sum to him. Allegedly, the preacher utilized this money to acquire real estate in Mombasa and Malindi, purchase 2 vehicles, and establish a television station for broadcasting his message. This financial commitment by certain followers prompted several others to do the same, selling their property and contributing funds to the church. By 2017, Mackenzie's teachings led to his and his late wife's arrest. Their doctrines, which opposed children accessing healthcare and education, included operating an unauthorized school and television station. Tragically, several children lost their lives due to the lack of proper healthcare, and yet he was set free due to lack of evidence that made him liable, as it was the families that made the fundamental decision not to provide healthcare for their children. However, in response, government authorities still intervened in 2017, rescuing 93 children from Mackenzie's church. Subsequently, his arrest also led to the shutdown of his television station by the Kenya Film Classification Board, a state corporation operating under the Kenyan government, mandated to regulate the creation, broadcasting, possession, distribution, and exhibition of films by rating them. In 2019, Mackenzie was arrested again for inciting the public against registration for Huduma number by likening it to the mark of the beast. Huduma number is a Kenyan governmental program in which a unique personal identification number is randomly assigned to every citizen at birth or upon registration in the program. The Huduma card will enable individuals to access various government services as well as use it as a travel document within the East African region. The card will have a person's data encoded in an electronic chip, eliminating the requirement for other identification methods. This is the number he likened to the mark of the beast, which is often associated with a symbolic or prophetic concept mentioned in the Bible's book of Revelation. In Christianity, this mark is envisioned as a symbol of allegiance to a malevolent power during apocalyptic times. The exact nature of the mark varies in interpretations, with some viewing it as a literal physical mark and others as a metaphorical representation of loyalty to oppressive systems. The significance of the mark of the beast is deeply rooted in religious beliefs, often sparking discussions and debates about its potential real-world implications within various theological frameworks. Mackenzie was also accused of brainwashing and abducting children to join his group. It was after this incident that he closed his church, sold it, and moved to the remote location in Shakahola. Mackenzie claimed that church had been shut down completely, but it hadn't. For on April 2023, a man whose identity was never revealed reported his wife and child missing. His actions that day saved many and exposed the devastation at Shakahola. When police entered the community to investigate, they discovered emaciated people and shallow graves. 15 members of the group were rescued by police. They stated that they had been ordered to starve themselves to death to meet Jesus. The 15 followers were in poor condition, and 4 died before they reached a hospital.
The police, they need support to comb this 800-acre piece of land so that we can rescue more and also, maybe unearth more mass graves that could be in any of this area that we are in.
Some of the people in the graves were later discovered to be missing organs, prompting the launch of an investigation into an illicit network involved in organ harvesting for the black market. Those apprehended ranged from high-profile ministers to leaders associated with Paul Mackenzie's church, the Good News International Ministries. And on top of all this devastation, officials also uncovered evidence of perpetrated against young girls within the cult before their untimely deaths. Concerns that these organs were harvested subsequent to the reported were substantiated by Interior Cabinet Secretary Professor Kittura Kindiki. On April 24th, search teams had to temporarily halt the excavation of bodies until autopsies were conducted on the initial 90 bodies due to the Malindi Sub-County Hospital's morgue nearing its capacity. By April 28th, heavy rainfall was reported to be impeding the progress of rescue and recovery operations. As of May 10th, 2023, 133 deaths were reported, including 8 who were rescued but later died. The majority of deaths were of children, with women being the next largest group. Professor Kittura Kindiki additionally stated that not all deaths were by starvation, saying that there were other methods used, including hurting them, just by physical and preliminary observations. Autopsies conducted on more than 100 bodies showed that the victims died of starvation, strangulation, suffocation, and blunt head trauma. As of the 2nd of August, the total number of reported deaths was 427, and the number of those reported missing was at least 613. So many lives lost, and why? How did this one man create a web of control that caused the deaths of hundreds and negatively shaped the lives of thousands? Those who listened to him believed he possessed extreme dominance, yet, in truth, he was a little tiny, deceptive man, falsely attributing his teachings to God. He enforced obedience by equating disobedience with defiance against God. Behind this facade, he exhibited a lack of empathy, committed acts of murder, exploited young girls, embodying the characteristics of a cult leader: narcissistic, psychopathic, intolerant of criticism, exploitative, and an underdog striving to elevate his social standing. His own family did tell us he was unremarkable. He never drew attention to himself, simply an ordinary person, both in his school days and throughout life. Paul remained unassuming and lived a modest life until he didn't. Instead, he adopted radical teachings that ultimately culminated in the Shakahola Massacre. Fueled by the power he wielded over his followers, his insatiable greed, and the writings of William Branham, a man who he shared a set of values and traits with. Branham's message, also utilized by one of the most evil cult leaders ever known, Jim Jones of the People's Temple, tragically led over 900 followers to mass suicide in Jonestown, Guyana. The central doctrine centered on fasting to attain what was called atomic power with God through fasting and prayer, instructing adherents to undergo a 40-day fasting period. Mackenzie propagated a similar doctrine, convincing his converts to believe in the transformative power of fasting and prayer, a belief that tragically led several people to succumb to hunger. Mackenzie preached that the fast would cleanse the body of evil and hasten the convert's journey to heaven. Consequently, individuals within Mackenzie's church began fasting to the point of death, allegedly encouraged to do so in the belief it would secure their place in heaven. Exploiting William Branham's doomsday theology, Mackenzie manipulated his victims by teaching Branham's end-time prophecies as a justification for the killing of men, women, and children within his sect. In his available YouTube sermons, which I do not want any part of posting here, but are a Google search away, Paul Mackenzie mirrored the apocalyptic teaching pattern established by William Branham, concurrently denouncing the Catholic Church, government systems, medical professionals and medicine, and the education system, similar to Branham's stance in the 1950s and 1960s. This sheds light on Mackenzie's process of radicalization. Upon discovery, Mackenzie, his third wife Rhoda, and 16 other members of his church were arrested by authorities and were being held in police custody as of the 7th of May, 2023. Mackenzie was denied bail on the 10th of May. As of the 14th of June, the total number of those arrested was 36. They have been charged with murder and terrorism-related offenses. On the 3rd of July, the Shanzu Magistrate Court released Mackenzie's wife, Rhoda, on a personal bond of 300,000 Kenya shillings. In his ruling, the Shanzu Senior Principal Magistrate said the state had failed to prove why Rhoda should continue being held with the other accused. She had been in custody for 62 days. The court also ruled Mackenzie and the co-accused to remain in custody where they currently are. On November 10th, Paul was found guilty of using unclassified films to advance his radical teachings.
Mackenzie was found guilty of being in possession and distributing films which have not been classified and operating a filming studio without a valid filming license. He was also found guilty of being in possession and exhibiting films through Times TV without a license. For this, he was sentenced to 6 months imprisonment. The sentences will run concurrently. And Malindi Senior Resident Magistrate Olga Onalo said a pre-sentence report on Mackenzie indicated that he was unaware he needed a KFCB license to broadcast, having obtained a broadcasting one. As she sentenced him, the magistrate also cited Mackenzie's age and the fact that the church he used to run had been closed. Mackenzie faces charges related to the deaths of 429 people whose bodies have so far been recovered from the Shakahola Massacre. He has been in custody at the Shimolatewa prison.
In respect to the charge of possession and exhibition, the defense counsel in mitigation stated that the accused had been charged with a similar offense, thereby making him a repeat offender. That, however, the said offense may not have been intentional. This cannot be the case, for once the accused person had been charged, that was information enough to him that he was running against the law and he ought to have refrained from the same. In light of the foregoing, in respect to count 2, I hereby sentence the accused person to 12 months imprisonment, while in respect to count 3, the accused person's explanation of not knowing the need for a license from the Film Classification Board, having obtained a broadcasting one, is a reasonable, though not entirely acceptable, as ignorance of the law is no defense, hence the resulting conviction. And in light of the same, I sentence the accused to 6 months imprisonment. The sentences shall run concurrently.
In her ruling, Senior Principal Magistrate Olga Onalo further ruled that Mackenzie was guilty of operating a filming studio without a valid license. However, he was acquitted of additional charges of influencing children to not attend school and using radical preaching to incite Christians against Hindus, Buddhists, and Muslims. On the 6th of February, Paul Mackenzie was charged with the murder of 191 children by the Malindi High Court. He is yet to be formally charged for terrorism, manslaughter, and child cruelty. In the aftermath of the Shakahola Massacre, the community still bears the scars of its devastating impact, particularly evident among families who lost their loved ones or almost lost their own lives. I can't even begin to comprehend the profound grief experienced by these people. Then there are the hundreds of victims who lost their lives and faced some of the most terrible deaths imaginable. It serves as a somber reminder of the susceptibility to manipulation and coercion that a lot of us are open to at some vulnerable point in our lives. A horrific turn of events that will linger in the community for years. I'm so sorry for the children who were violated, the people who lost their lives, and the people who lost their loved ones to this cult. May they find some healing through time. And I'll end there, Marafiki. I'll continue to follow this case and update you on the final verdict. If you want to hear more about this case and other cases from my home continent, please subscribe to my channel. Until next time, stay safe and let's work together to make positive changes, no matter how small in the world around us. Kwaheri.